slumber.
Hello and welcome to the second of a multi-part series analyzing Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. I will be playing through the entire game and commenting on whatever I deem important or interesting. Though the occasional personal input or anecdote is possible, the goal of this analysis is to be objective, to go beyond how I personally feel about Sekiro and instead try to understand it and assess its strengths and weaknesses from a neutral position. This project will take a long time to finish and the end result will be multiple hours long, so I will be dividing it into smaller thematic segments. This one will cover Hirata Estate from the beginning of the level up to the encounter with Owl. Though watching from the start is advisable for full context, each video can be viewed on its own if you're interested in a particular topic. It took longer than I'd hoped, but here we are at Hirata Estate, where all of Wolf's troubles began. Being diligent enough to turn around does reward us with an item this time. I won't try to make of this more than it is, but I do feel like it's a tiny representation of the theme of persistence dripping through FromSoftware games. Considering how hard it is to miss the dying NPC at the start of the level, FromSoftware's choice to spell out that we're within a 3-year-old memory despite that being part of the NPC's dialogue is a weird case of handholding. If the player can't be bothered enough to exhaust 2 lines of dialogue, they deserve to not know what's going on.
That was 3 years ago.
The enemy on the bridge is carrying a torch, which means it's time to get acquainted with Burn, the first and most inoffensive status effect we encounter in Sekiro. Get hit with enough fire attacks and Burn triggers, taking a small portion of your health away. More importantly, it holds posture regeneration, which forces you to be more precise with your parries. Burn is dangerous enough to pay attention to, directly engages with Sekiro's most distinctive combat mechanic, and isn't needlessly punishing. This can't be said about other status effects in Sekiro, all of which falter in at least one of these categories. I want to briefly mention this invisible wall in the water, as it's the only one I've found in the world. A small pile of rubble causing you to slaughter everything that moves in Dark Souls 2 aside, FromSoftware rarely resorts to cheap roadblocks, and they don't get much cheaper than an invisible wall. The strangest part is that several other bodies of water deal with this by natural means, rocks, caves, waterfalls, etc., but this one spot is just one big invisible wall. I'm curious if there are other such spots in Sekiro that I've missed, so feel free to share in the comments if you know of any. We meet pot noble Harunaga here, who's the epitome of less is more. He is literally an arm stretching out from a pot, yet easily one of the most memorable character designs in the game, including all the enemies and bosses. We later find out there's another pot noble, and they both wish to become a carp, one of those trademark FromSoftware quests that make you slightly uneasy and undoubtedly part of the reason why the pot nobles are so memorable. Harunaga sells some interesting items. A divine grass that cures all ailments and fully restores health, a combat art, a mask fragment and the withered red gourd. The mask fragment will become important later, but for now let's discuss the gourd. It is a rechargeable item that raises burn resistance and lowers burn buildup, but doesn't cure burn after it's been already afflicted. With how easy it is to acquire the withered red gourd early on, it's obvious that devs didn't want it to completely kill off the use of dowsing powder. The end result, though, is an item you'd only ever use if you run out of powders, since they offer higher resistance and actually cure burn. Realistically, with how sporadic fire attacks are in Sekiro, the withered red gourd probably won't come into play until facing Enshin, or Demon of Hatred, the final boss of one ending, and an optional very late game boss if you choose a different ending. The biggest problem I have with the withered red gourd is that the pot nobles only deal in treasure carp scales, which are much more difficult to stack than Sen. Spending even 2 of these scales on an incredibly situational item, not knowing you'll meet another pot noble with better inventory many hours down the line, is a poor investment that is encouraged by the burn inflicting enemies on the bridge. You'd be forgiven for thinking the Withered Red Gourd would be very useful right after dealing with fire-based attacks, wasting precious resources as a result. The area right after the second Sculptor's Idol is very unique, not just for Sekiro, but for FromSoftware games as a whole. I can't think of another section so heavily driven by dialogue. We receive hints about all three prosthetic tools situated here. Once by overhearing soldiers celebrating the sacking of Hirata, once guided by a dying defender of the estate, and once by a looter who may or may not be winding us up with that 3-story pagoda of his.
While I was on my way here, I saw a 3-story pagoda on top of some cliff. It was a fine pagoda.
All three hints come very naturally and make sense without feeling forced by the game's insistence that we must find these tools.
Oh, thank goodness. Honorable Shinobi.
My favorite bit of dialogue in Hirata comes from these shacks over here. One resident of the estate is grateful to see you and considers you the Lord's last hope, even giving you an item which will come in handy against one of the two main bosses of the area. Another resident renders you a traitor and wishes for your death, convinced Wolf must have something to do with the assault on the estate. Just because you're trying to do the right thing doesn't mean everyone will see it that way and praise you for it.
Normally those bandits wouldn't have stood a chance. Yes, it had to be you. I hope you die, traitor.
We burning this temple next, boss?
No, leave it. Go on to the next one.
But if there's any offerings, we could give them to Lord Juzo.
Enough! We don't take from Buddha. How many times do I have to tell you before it sinks into your thick skull?
Please, don't get angry at me, boss. I'm sorry my skull's so thick.
After crushing a particularly thick skull, we can pick up the sculptor's favorite prosthetic tool, the Shinobi axe. This tool has the honor of being the only one that's pretty much mandatory for dealing with specific enemies. You can take down shielded enemies without it, eventually, but the axe makes the process so much quicker that choosing to forego it borders on masochism. The demonstration of this difference will have to wait because we are faced with one of FromSoftware's most antiquated mechanics, the necessity to travel back to the central hub for certain actions. Instead of attaching the axe straight away and owning some noobs, I must stop my progress to fast travel, click a menu a couple of times, then fast travel back to continue where I left off. As much as I consider this design to be clunky and outdated, it does encourage the player to interact with Emma and the sculptor more often. Both have a crucial role to play in the game's narrative and some of its endings, so I am willing to cut the devs some slack on this one instance. I'm still happy Elden Ring cut down on this as much as it did though. I am positively predisposed to Sekiro's skill tree in general, but I stand firm that locking the Mikiri counter behind the use of skill points is a very poor decision. The move is so essential to the combat that giving players even a 0.001% chance of missing it is too high. Mikiri should have been available from the start for free, and I have the utmost sympathy for anyone who beat the game without ever acquiring it. My other criticism of the skill and by extension the combat system is the limit of one active combat art at a time. It's one of frustratingly many instances where Sekiro presents a cool mechanic and does everything it can to limit its use. Just imagine how much more variety switching between several combat arts on the fly would add to enemy encounters. It would also do away with most players sticking with the Mortal Blade at all times after acquiring it, due to it being a safe bet in virtually any situation. You can feel free to enjoy this collection of axe bashes before we get to the Mikiri skill test that awaits us ahead. Shinobi hunter Enshin of Misen's entire purpose is to teach us to use the Mikiri counter. It is very unfortunate then that he's doing such a poor job of it. On the one hand, there are 4 soldiers in 3 different corners of the arena that we must clear out to stand a chance against this mini-boss. On the other hand, we can take the Shinobi Hunter's first health bar with stealth, and he then dies after exactly 2 successful Mikiri counters. Is it just me, or would this mini-boss be infinitely better at what it's trying to do if there were no additional enemies in his arena and it took a few more counters to kill him instead? The best excuse I can come up with is that FromSoftware wanted to prepare us for the Juzu fight with a lighter version of it here, but that's like preparing to take a swim in an ocean full of shit by swimming in a lake full of shit first. Why do any of it to begin with? Sekiro's design is tailored for one-on-one combat. Bosses and mini-bosses can kill you in a second, and surrounding them with basic mobs doesn't make the experience any better, only more frustrating. Throwing in a couple lone shadows in the Sword Saint fight wouldn't have made it better, so why would a similar concept work for Enshin of Misen or Juzo? Rant over for now, but we'll resume when we get to the Drunken. First, let's highlight this shiny item in the distance that lures you toward finding the third and final prosthetic tool at Hirata Estate, the Mist Raven. It would take a complete moron to go for the item and not see the hidden path that leads up to the tool, especially embarrassing if that moron has completed multiple playthroughs of Sekiro beforehand and is preparing a multi-hour critique of the game. Hey, at least the carp also made a fool out of me, so the circus was in full force. Anyways, here's me remembering I missed the tool a few hours after the fact and stumbling my way up to get it. I am way overpowered at this point, but for a new player that finds the pagoda upon their first visit to Hirata Estate, the lone shadow can pose quite the challenge, of the good kind. This is an optional area and the price for beating the ninja is solid but far from essential. It being more difficult than other enemies you faced so far is an optional challenge you can run away from or run past if you're a quick thinker. The only punishment is coming up here the first time having exhausted your resurrective power and dying to an ambush from a mid to late game enemy. Even then, the lone shadow is visually imposing enough to indicate its higher level of difficulty. All in all, fair. The Mist Raven itself is a dream for someone like me who sticks to the thesis there's no clear-cut easy mode in FromSoftware games. The Mist Raven, if you get its timing right, is a free dodge and attack, which is a very powerful effect. It still requires mechanical skill and environmental awareness though. Sure, once you master the use of this tool, it is as overpowered as it gets in Sekiro. But mastering it requires practice and effort, words not usually associated with easy mode. Contact Medicine can exploit the system by eliminating the timing precision, but figuring out self-inflicted damage counts and unlocks the Mist Raven's full potential is skillful in itself. Cleverness is a skill too. And if you just looked it up on the internet, fair enough. That's your way to have fun with the game, so who am I to tell you your fun is inadmissible? My point is that FromSoftware games provide many tools to deal with the dangers they place in front of you. Some may be stronger or easier to implement than others, but none are this magical baby mode button elitists would like to believe exists. You have to put in effort or be naturally good at these games or you will die, a lot. There's no shortcut to victory. The paths leading there are only different, nothing more. Knowing what we know after playing the entire game makes this meeting with Owl all the more fascinating. Wolf's final memory of his adoptive father is that of a selfless shinobi whose last noble action in life was to give his son a chance at protecting his master. All that's left of the shinobi code for Wolf now that Owl is presumably dead. In reality, Owl is the one behind the attack on Hirata Estate and is sending Wolf straight into his accomplice Lady Butterfly's hands, where Wolf suffers his first canonical death. Ao later uses us the same way he did Butterfly to do his dirty bidding by killing Emma and Enshin, though that plan doesn't work out quite as peachy for the old bird.
In the estate mansion.
The bell charm memories are open to interpretation more so than anything else in Sekiro. Mine is that the first version is incomplete, if not completely false. It is told through the outsider perspective of Kuro. He doesn't know that Ao is a traitor, that it's the Ministry's men assaulting the estate. He only knows of Lady Butterfly's betrayal. This is why we see Ao as an honorable defender of Hirata and the attackers as petty thieves. The second memory from Ao's perspective reveals all the finer details. The final boss there opens up a timeline paradox, but I have a particularly poetic theory to explain it away, which I will happily share a dozen or so videos from now. In the meantime, I'm curious to hear your interpretation of the Hirata memories, or alternatively you can let me know that there is a canonical explanation and I can shove my poetic theories up the Miss Noble's flute. In any case, thanks for watching, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for part 3 where we will jump back to the Ashina outskirts and face the ender of Sekiro playthroughs himself, Chained Ogre, among other things. Hope to see you there.
I'm not sure if what I saw is what truly happened.
That's how it works.